Checkout tracking by the NPD group brings you a receipt collecting system that gathers data anonymously through technology we created, providing your businesses with answers.
Take it away.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Who of you is a game studio? Owns a game studio, builds games? Cool. Who publishes games? Any of you guys publish games? All right. Monetization, user acquisition? Half one? Oh, cool. So most of you guys have felt the passion of building awesome games and have struggled with allowing enough time to build awesome games. So my name is Bart van Berg, or just Bart Vandenberg, and I'm going to speak about pre-launch testing and how it helps us build better games. To give you some context, I've been in games and online services for the last 10 years. I've got a degree in human and computer interaction, and some call me developer, some call me artist, and if you ask one of our developers, he'll call me, he's the guy scripting and duct taping everything. We founded Blue Giraffe Games in 2012, so we're about 3 years old, and prior to that we were part of the internal studio of Gamehouse, which is part of the Real Networks company in Seattle. And when we started our company, we had 10+ years in developing games with the entire team. We had a great understanding of building desktop games for a pretty big market on gamehouse.com. We understood what players loved, and we had a pretty big player base to work off. So when we split off and started our own company, we figured, well, developing a game, that's something we've done for 10 years, and understanding the market, that's pretty easy. And we figured we would just rely on some organic traffic, because what we're doing now is awesome, everybody will notice it. We would send out early builds to the press, and they would love it and would write reviews weeks in advance for the launch. And we thought that was just the best way to build our game. We did run into a lot of limitations sending out builds, so the press would ask us for a build, and we were just stuck to the 100 devices in test flight. And we would send out builds only a few weeks before launch, because we figured, well, the game isn't finished yet, so it needs to be polished before we actually send it out to the press for review, otherwise we'll just get wrong feedback, which ended in building a game in 4 to 6 months and having a Superman complex. So basically we thought, at this point we've solved everything, and if stuff isn't good, then we can quickly tweak it. The things that need to be changed are just 0.1% changes, and everything else is solid. So with that sort of arrogancy, we thought we're going to nail the market, make millions with games. And at that time we thought premium, that's still in the landscape, so we'll just go for that. So we launched our first game, and it didn't do anything. And at the time we thought it had to do with aligning traffic or not understanding where our players were, or it had to do with the fact that there was just a momentum thing, or not getting featured by Apple. So that really depressed us. And it took us a couple of years to think about how our development process was somehow mixing up the entire idea of building a game. So only recently, I think a year ago, we grabbed that same title and we presented it, a prototype, to anonymous players. And we got a shitload of feedback. Stuff about the mechanic not being right, speed of the game, user onboarding wasn't right. We were struggling with retaining the players. It wasn't well balanced, yet it looked awesome. The artwork was perfect. We spent tons on audio and music, and even at that point we figured, how is this possible? How could we be so arrogant to think that we could just build a game, launch it, and everybody would be using it? So 3 years later, we've learned that in our case, we thought we understood the market, but we were completely off. We didn't know who our players were. We wouldn't be able to point at one specific player that would fit our criteria. where that player was. We thought they would just be on Facebook or on the App Store. What type of games they were currently playing, and also very important, what's the current zone of interest? So what type of games are they playing apart from the title we're proposing to them, and what's their attention span shifting towards? We've also learned that even though it's very difficult for a passionate indie developer to involve a player from day one, you should definitely do it. Get someone in a room who can be blunt and be wildly tapping on a device only after 8 hours of development. Keep in mind that that player will give you feedback that can be valuable, but it will also be blunt, honest, and will probably hurt your feeling. A third thing is that we learned to sync with distribution. So we thought with the skills we had, we would rock at reaching millions through an existing network, or that we should work with one specific publisher and that would solve all of our issues. So by now we understand that your title has a certain footprint and it doesn't necessarily match with any publisher, so you really have to tweak and find the right publisher to work with, and even then you might be blunt to it and ask them how they would solve certain issues regarding user acquisition, or what's their tone of voice on social, how sincere is their customer support, what's their live ops operation, and how are they providing additional content on different games to support that. But the most important thing we've learned is just ask. And we started doing that as indie developer around friends and family, and we moved to fellow professionals because most of the professors also like to play games and provide you feedback. But that wasn't enough. And we've been playing around with several small tools on the web to figure out how to prototype or play test or focus test our games, and we couldn't find any tools available. So we started to ask around in the market who was currently using those tools, are there tools available to do online playtesting, and how do you acquire those testers. So what I've done is basically in the last 6 months, I've done a small survey. I asked 35 indie developers and 2 big publishers to give me some more insight on how they do pre-launch testing, and the results were pretty surprising to me. So I'll just walk you through the results. If you have any questions, it's interactive, so shout it out, and I'll try to answer those depending on the results and the data. So basically I asked 35 indies and 2 publishers, what tech are you using? Well, most are building in Unity, focus on mobile, doing Android, iOS, and some still do desktop, but just a very small minority is doing console, at least at the target audience I was asking. The first question I asked was, okay, so basically you do pre-launch testing, and they said, yes, we do pre-launch testing. Out of the 37 recipients, 100% of them said that they did pre-launch testing. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how important was pre-launch testing, it got a 9.5 out of that. So it really showed that the majority of people were very focused on doing testing and integrating that in the service. But when I asked where they would find the testers, even at publishers, it felt odd that the majority would use friends and family to test games. Even with big publishers, like business developers would send out small builds to family or would showcase at home to get a proper feedback, and not asking the network audience that is available. Apart from friends and family, you still see a lot of indies rely on fellow professionals, which really works for mechanic and balancing feedback, but it doesn't really tell you much about whether your game matches a specific market. You can somehow reflect that to what they're doing, but it's much better to ask the actual player about that specific question. If you look at what stage of development they involve players, most of them involve players as late as beta. Alpha is still there, but I was shocked that, for example, focus testing and even on ideation, so say a week into development, they wouldn't be testing. They would just be an internal team developing something and up to alpha and beta they will be testing. Also, actual testing isn't seen as a separate development phase, so it's something they see in the entire development loop during the entire process. So what do you test for? Bugs and issues are the biggest topic to test on, but also validating game mechanics and concepts, which I think is awesome, but it doesn't reflect the previous answer, because validating game mechanic and concept at beta seems to me pretty late. And monetization out of 10 came as 7. So as in that sense, it's either specific to this audience that are not testing monetization, or it's an overall effect. What tools are they using? Well, first of all, Facebook seems to be the primary point for acquiring users. Email sign-ups using MailChimp and SurveyMonkey are important. And private forums are still an important platform as well. Who's using Facebook to test? Any of you guys? No? It's on number 1. So what pre-launch analytics tools are used? I figured most of the studios will be using Google Analytics or game analytics tools like Flurry. But apparently everybody is relying on gathering feedback using email or other tools. And I'm interested to hear what you guys are using to do that early pre-launch analytics. So in feedback terms, most of the people use chats and real-life conversations to gather feedback, which makes sense if you have family and friends being an important test audience. And only a minority uses existing tools like Playtest Cloud or Attentive to gather feedback, which I thought those tools, so part of them are free, so you could use them to integrate in the test. Up until a year ago, TestFlight was available for Android. So that probably tells about the percentage of people actually using TestFlight to develop for iOS. And Google Play as well. Even though those tools have a limitation, TestFlight being 1,000 plus players at beta submit, and 100 to 200 using internal testing. So in most cases, those tools are used at the point of actual beta development and not at ideation. So I'm interested to know what you guys are using. Are you using TestFlight as well? Is that an important platform to test, distribute on? Yeah. I noticed that the publishers have built their own tech to distribute as well. So they built a small wrapping tool to create a kill switch for builds. But apparently Dropbox is still an interesting way of distributing builds to players as well. And one interesting one, which really popped out, was a studio that built a WebGL version of a game, a prototype, in browser, and used that to distribute it to an early audience of up to 10,000 people. And once they saw there was enough traction, they would convert it to iOS or Android native. So what's currently missing? Studios are still missing a lot of feedback from players. It makes sense, because with family and friends, they just rely on the opinions, but there are limited tools available. Also, connecting to a target market is pretty difficult. User acquisition costs are high, and during testing, you might not want to invest much in finding players to test stuff on. And also, context-aware in-game testing is something they're missing. So it would be cool to have a tool available that will actually show you the context in which the gamer is playing to understand the experience and the feedback you're getting. So that's something, if anyone's building a tool, that would be awesome if you could introduce that. Lastly, live code updates and balancing. There are tools available like Delta DNA that do live updating of variables to do tweaking on balancing on live titles. but those tools are quite limited. So 2015, where we're now, one of the things we figured out we need to focus on is we're going to prototype games in a much earlier stage by attending game jams. We've done it in the last 2 years, and they've shown to be very interesting. Also to get feedback from players. We've pledged ourselves that we're actually going to get more feedback by actually asking players to contribute to the game, either virtually by sending out builds to players, but also just walking downtown and shoving a device in someone's face to let them play a game. And we have had the luck to work with some publishers that understand testing very well. So we intensifies the collaboration with those publishers to understand how to best support an ecosystem of pre-launch testing. And lastly, we still have like a MailChimp list of players that sign up through some of our sites, which we use to target specific questions that allow us to send out small builds. And most recently, I think in the last year, we've built a small tool called Playtest. You should check it out. It's basically test flight on steroids, which allow studios to distribute an early build of an iOS or an HTML5 game at this stage to players and virtually look over the shoulder of that player while they're playing the game. We couldn't find any tools that did this and also allowed us to chat with those players one-on-one. I think about a year ago we figured you can send builds out to 1,000 people. We thought that was necessary, but with Playtest we can target 50 to 80 people, and that audience truly provides us feedback about game mechanic, difficulty, but also how the art style is perceived by that player, and if it actually fits a topic that they like. And that tool is currently available. I'd love to have you guys take a look at it and give me some feedback, because it's something we've built internally out of our own necessity, and we figured, well, if it works for us, maybe for other studios and publishers, you can use it as well, so check it out. So basically, that's my presentation.
All right, who's got a question for Bart?
When you put really early versions of your play loop out there, how do you control the anti-evangelists that sort of take it and can pick on the areas that you haven't maybe developed yet? I mean, a lot of the reasons these are held back, so it's very easy for an anti-evangelist to go out into the wild and be like, oh, I tried an early version of this game, it was terrible, and that can really affect your acquisition.
That's a very good question. We've noticed that realm happens only around the fellow professionals. They seem to focus on how well crafted a game is, and they look at how you've integrated tech into this. But we were surprised by the audience we target through Playtest. They understand if you present them an alpha or pre-alpha or even a game that's out there for 24 hours, and you provide that context, that they understand this. And of course, there's always a small amount of players that won't like it at all. But that's also interesting to hear. And as soon as you start to connect with those players, if you follow up to them, actually ask, so you think this is stupid or it's not working, could you tell me how we could fix this? They are easily converted from being non-advocacy into your prime ambassador players. So I think it's just a matter of how you connect with those players and retain during development in order to make it word-like. Cool.
What processes do you have for feedback? We started doing kind of wider tests and just got overwhelmed with the feedback and how to sort of systematize acting on that feedback.
Yeah, that's a good question. We've implemented a couple of features. And first of all, you need to draft a pretty clear research statement. What are you trying to get out of the data? Otherwise, you will be overwhelmed with a lot of metadata, and it's hard to get a coherent image out of that. Secondarily, what we've done is we've formatted the way how we get the content in such a way that it can't be misinterpreted. So surveys are set up in a specific way. And what we try to do is we try to send out small batches of requests to provide feedback, see what that delivers us, and based on that do follow-ups. So instead of broadcasting it to the entire audience, do nitpicking, and from there see if you can scale it up. And that has allowed us to at least keep it comprehensible. But it's true, there's a lot of stuff coming in, and some of them is interesting, and some of them might be interesting for the future. But it is indeed a pretty difficult topic to make that happen. Yeah.
Any more questions? At the front.
Have you heard of usertesting.com?
Yeah.
So I'm a UX researcher. I work there at User Testing, and
Oh, cool.
we do tons of testing for mobile games.
Yeah.
I know that one of the things you mentioned was having that context for the feedback that they were giving.
Yeah.
So with User Testing, you actually get an entire video of them playing the game, and you get verbal feedback while they're playing it. You can see the motions they're making on their screens, things like that. So it's really good at giving context. You also, as a researcher, it's really good before you, sorry, I don't mean to like preach or like.
No, that's
anything,
good.
but it's a really good idea to, like you said, come up with objectives first and questions that specifically you want answered for a specific test. So you can write out a test plan with a series of tasks and questions that you want answered by the player, and things that you want them to do. And I can confirm what you said about if you like make them aware that it's like a pre-alpha build or something very early on, they're usually pretty adept in adapting their feedback to that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And it's awesome. We've been playing around with Strong Loop as well. They do recording as well. But I think the cool thing about your testing is that you also supply the players, so you can actually batch out with a question and get feedback on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd love to talk to you more about it as well.
Oh yeah, cool, awesome. Any questions?
I think that wraps it up.
Yeah.
So Bart,
All right.
thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.